Welcome back to AM Joy. On Friday, I had the opportunity to sit down with House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi to discuss the latest on Donald Trump's Russia problem, Mike Flynn's quest for immunity, and Devin Nunes's dysfunction. Take a look. And joining me now is House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. I'm always tempted to call you Madam Speaker, but Leader Pelosi, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So I'm going to start with, I guess, it's hard to pick sometimes what the blockbuster news of the day is, but let's start with General Michael Flynn seeking immunity from prosecution and willing to testify before the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. We've already had the Senate Intelligence Committee decline.
Yes.
Can you foresee the House Committee saying yes?
No, but I certainly hope not. It's far too early to be even talking about immunity. You're talking about a person who has misrepresented the facts already to Congress. So what does he want immunity for? For potential lying to Congress or what else? But it is... he shouldn't have immunity. If at the end of the day, after he's prosecuted, he wants a plea bargain, that's another story. Yeah. But he shouldn't have immunity.
Let's talk about Devin Nunes, who is leading the House Intelligence Committee at the moment. Do you think he has credibility now as the leader of that investigation?
No, I think that he not only has lost all credibility, I think he's tarnished the office that he holds. He's brought discredit to something that is a very, very serious position in the Congress.
Yeah, and as you know, it is the Speaker's decision who leads these committees. Speaker Ryan has said that Devin Nunes came to him before going to the White House with this leaked information that we now believe came from 3 White House staffers, one of whom used to work for Devin Nunes. If, let's say, a Democratic committee leader had come to you, if Adam Schiff had come to you in the same manner and said that I've gotten information from the White House, I want to go to the President of the United States and give him these intercepts, give him this information about perhaps transcripts about his campaign, what would you have said?
Well, the fact is that the chairman of the committee has a responsibility to the ranking member of the committee. This is the way it has always been. This is highly unusual for 2 reasons. First of all, we don't know what the subject of those documents are, but we do know that Nunes was a part of the Trump transition and that these documents probably referred to that. In any event, the investigation we want the committee to have is about the Trump transition as well. So it is, it was wrong on so many scores in terms of whatever guidance. We don't know what the conversation was with the Speaker, but if the guidance was go to the President and then go to the press, that was very wrong.
Yeah. Do you think that Paul Ryan has been forthcoming about his involvement? Because again, he is the person that Devin Nunes supposedly went to before making this very odd trip to the White House.
I don't know, but I'll just say this. The appointment to the Intelligence Committee is a very serious responsibility. I get to appoint the Democrats, the Speaker gets to appoint the Republicans, and that's the same thing in the Senate. So this is not anything that goes through steering and policy and caucus. And this is, you have put your credibility on the line on who you appoint to that position, and those people have responsibility to the committee, to the caucus, to the Congress, and to the country. It's about gathering intelligence to keep the American people safe. It's about gathering intelligence to have force protection. We don't want our men and women in uniform to go in harm's way. We want to avoid it at all costs. We want to get the intelligence to avoid possible conflict. But if they go, we want them to have the best possible intelligence as they go in. And here we have a situation that has been so completely politicized. And what's very sad about it is it brings dishonor to the whole committee. We are very proud of our Democrats on the committee. We're very proud of our ranking member, Adam Schiff. He's done a remarkable job. And maybe some of the Republican members have comported themselves very well as well, but not the chairman. Yeah. So when they say, oh, the House committee, it's dysfunctional, no. It's a dysfunctional chairman. Yeah.
And the president's spokesman, Sean Spicer, has repeatedly said and said again during his press briefing today that what the media should be looking at, that what we should see investigated, including by these committees, is whether or not the president, the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, wiretapped Donald Trump and his campaign team. And now they've also gone off into whether Obama administration officials were admitting to that, and we're putting that information on the record saying that that took place. Is that a legitimate avenue of inquiry?
Well, I don't think that anything that Spicer says is legitimate, because it changes from time to time. But he was just saying a short while ago that he didn't think that information came from anybody at the White House and that. But let's enlarge the issue for a moment. We're talking about the presidency of the United States. We're talking about somebody who's supposed to be leading our country, at least managing his own affairs in the White House, and of course his relationship with Congress and the American people. And we have a crazy system here where we have a president who's tweeting things on the basis of very little knowledge, but that isn't a problem for him. So really, I think that there should be some adults in the Republican Party who would say, please, you're bringing dishonor to the office of president by making it look like it's a personal acquisition of yours. No, it is a public responsibility. Mm-hmm. Honor it.
And you talk about, you know, the dignity of the presidency, sort of the honor of the presidency. At this point, should Americans be concerned about the legitimacy of the Trump presidency?
Well, that remains to be seen. We'll see how the investigation goes. That's why we're calling for an independent outside commission. I have said all along, what is it that the Russians have on President Trump, politically, financially, and personally? Let's find out. The American people have a right to know the truth. Why is it that the Republicans want to hide the truth from the American people? Let's all support an outside, independent, nonpartisan commission so that we can look into this, because this is about our national security, as the security of our country. This president has flirted with the idea of relaxing sanctions on Russia. He's put Putin on a pedestal at the expense of our American values. He has undermined, doesn't even know, I don't think, what the START Treaty is, but nonetheless questioned that. That's about our national security. It's also about the security of our democracy. It is a proven fact that the Russians disrupted our election. Now, the question is, was there collusion, was there connection, or whatever? Mm-hmm. That investigation needs to happen, because we don't want it to happen again. We don't want it to happen again here. We don't want it to happen in other countries. Yeah. So these are much bigger issues as to whether Flynn should have immunity or Spicer knows what he's talking about, or that the president is tweeting at the expense of taking time to think. Yeah. To reflect, to make judgments, to lead our country. This is, we have important questions here. We'll see about where the investigations take us, but we have to have the investigation.
And you think a commission rather than a special prosecutor, and if so, why?
Well, a special prosecutor would be appointed by the Justice Department, appointed by the President of the United States. It's a path. Yeah. There can be some investigation from the two committees in the House, the one in the House and the Senate, if Mr. Nunes recuses himself and a new chairman is there for that investigation. Doesn't have to be for everything before the committee, but for this particular investigation. So that's something, and if they do a prosecutor, that's interesting. But the outside, that's what we did on 9/11, and it had so much, commanded so much respect. Nobody thought of it in terms of being political.
But there's a third way, which is, of course, the independent counsel statute, which only Congress can reauthorize. Do you think it's time to talk about that? I mean, the idea that there was an independent counsel put in for essentially a sexual scandal with Bill Clinton. Aren't we at a point now when we're talking about foreign interference where we may need to talk about an independent counsel?
Well, I don't know. I didn't think it should have been there for Bill Clinton, to tell you the truth. I really didn't. And to think of what they put the nation through. You know, of course, Bill Clinton, but nothing compared to what they put the nation through. So there are these different options, but certainly one of them is not to have the Senate have an investigation and the House be deemed dysfunctional when it's just one person who's dysfunctional, the chairman of the committee. But the outside commission is the way to go. Mm-hmm. So there's no thought of whose agenda is at work and how does Congress choose who that person is, because it's still tied to Congress. But it is, it is something. Yeah. It is something more than what is happening in the House right now. And I don't know that this same speaker who fails to realize what the responsibilities are of the chair of the Intelligence Committee, how near he would be to appointing an independent counsel.
Sure.